On this month's University of Arizona Futures in Digital Learning podcast, we bring you a conversation with Emily Jo Schawller and Gretchen Gibbs from the University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology to discuss the impacts of AI across education.
Academic integrity is one of the questions that comes up often from folks related to generative AI.
Join us as we discuss strategies for incorporating AI into your courses, pros and cons of using different AI tools, and how to engage in conversations across your institution about the use of AI. Hello and welcome to this month's Futures of Digital Learning podcast. Once again, I am Adam Davi, Instructional Design Manager at UCAT. I'm here with my co-host, Brian Hale. Brian, how's it going?
Hey, everybody.
And we are joined today to talk about AI by a couple other members of the UCAT team. We have Gretchen Gibbs, Professor of Practice, and Emily Jo Schawller, Assistant Professor of Practice. Welcome, both of you, to the podcast this month.
Hey, Adam. Hey, Brian.
Hey.
Awesome.
Excited to be here.
Excellent. We are excited to have you here, and we're excited to talk about this topic of AI, which has become quite buzzworthy in the last couple months with ChatGPT, launching and taking the world by storm. Good or bad as it may seem. But we wanted to have you on here because I know there are lots of implications for education in terms of what AI can do and what types of impacts it can have. And the two of you were working on crafting kind of a statement for the university. Is that correct? About use of AI and whatnot. So I'm curious just to hear what was the thought process with crafting that statement, and what did you want to kind of get across to the greater university community in terms of what that would say?
That's a great question. I can kind of start, and Gretchen, feel free to jump in, but the statement was really focused on AI and writing because that's where we were getting a lot of questions. And there's what's called the Coalition of Writing Across Campus, which includes librarians, the writing program, general education. There's about 25 folks from different spaces that really represent and support writing. And so a few of us in UCAT started the statement and then got feedback with really the purpose to be addressing some of the questions we were hearing, alleviating concerns, and inviting people into the conversation. We really wanted it to be the start of a conversation and definitely not the end.
Yeah.
And we see it as a really evolving document and space where we can begin educating ourselves. I know for me, it was really helpful to write and grapple with because it was a chance for me to read these wonderful things and learn from colleagues and spend some time just thinking about AI writing and all the ways it's already been here and all the directions it can go. So for me, that was kind of the impetus for that project.
Yeah, I think I'd add to it that one of the key partners in that, along with the Writing Center, is the Writing Across the Curriculum effort, and specifically Dr. Amy Mapes. And this concept of writing across the curriculum really addresses how integral to our education system, not just in college, but all through from the very start, in kindergarten, writing is to both how we construct knowledge, how we share knowledge, and how teachers and students determine whether they know something. And yet we do all kinds of writing, and it's really different. And so across the curriculum, people are writing lab reports, they're practicing how to do business emails, how to do marketing campaigns, how to write an academic paper, how to generate creative ideas or an outline. This writing takes many, many forms. So the questions that come up around AI and writing range from, well, should my students use spell check or Google Translate in my assignments? Is that okay? To, wow, I just put in my essay question on my midterm into ChatGPT, and it gave me an answer that I'd just say I'd give the student an A. Does this mean I need to worry about academic integrity?
Yeah, well, that's and that's great. That was going to be my next question is, what kind of questions are coming up, and what do people see as kind of the pros and cons of using this AI technology in education?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it's interesting. What I love about this topic is it's everything from really broad questions, such as academic integrity, assignment design, to really smaller things like this sentence or this one bit of code I plugged into AI and it was really helpful. So it's really spanning so much of what we talk about in teaching and learning in general, which I see as a real pro because it's giving us an avenue to talk to folks about everything from, well, why are you designing an assignment the way you are?
Right.
And what does assessment or feedback or process look like? So I think that's a pro from the UCAT perspective. I think for students, a huge pro is that especially a tool like ChatGPT, it can potentially allow for brainstorming or accessibility or things like that that are still kind of underexplored. So I'm excited to see the ways that that can grow. I think some of the cons is that a lot of the information comes from humans, and humans are naturally biased and, oftentimes might have inaccuracies or potential, what's the word I'm looking for? Inequities in presenting information. And I think one of the cons is for something like ChatGPT, we don't necessarily know where that information's coming from. Like we can guess, and so how do you cite it? How do you think about responsibility? How do you have conversations with students about something that is still very underexplored and unknown, while also recognizing spell check is like this, Grammarly is like this. Grammarly I used today, and it's definitely not neutral in how it approaches language. And so I think some of the pros and cons for UCAT is we get to have these conversations, and then there's a lot of pros and cons for students who get to be hopefully in a wave where teachers are exploring.
I love the broadness that you really talk about, the broadness of the conversations, Emily Jo. I mean, one of the things that come in a very, very broad conversation is kind of, what is it to be human? If ChatGPT is human-like, what is it that humans can do that the machine can't do? And that's a perpetual question. It's the question that humanities classes have been asking, what is it to be human since the beginning of any culture, I think. And ChatGPT engages us in that conversation too. Also, when we think about pros and cons, it kind of depends on point of view. And what I mean by that is, for example, let's say a student has a worksheet, a bunch of questions they're going to answer. What are some of the pros and cons of using ChatGPT if you think, oh, this is how I'm going to answer this assignment? One of the big ones is inaccuracy. Some of the inaccuracies of ChatGPT is you can say, well, give me citations for the answers. Because of the way large language model works, it's a generative AI. That is, it's not going out and finding information on the internet. It's looking at patterns of language and then generating unique answers. This means that Turnitin can't find it because it doesn't text match, and the student might think pro.
Right.
Okay? The con is that it might be that elephant is often associated with the word nursing blood test. And so ChatGPT will create a sentence that puts elephant in an illogical relationship in the sentence. It's grammatically correct. It seems to sound authoritative, but it makes no sense. This is a con. The pro is it might help, as Emily Jo said, if I have to write an essay and I'm not sure how to start, I might ask it to create me an outline, and then, oh, right, those are like the 4 points. And I'm only doing a short answer, so I'm only going to focus on this one thing, but it might get you started. And in this sense, it can almost be like a very individualized thinking partner. One of the cons is that ChatGPT invents citations because it's generative. If a person asks it to include citations, literally it generates citations. It doesn't go out and find the citation in a way that a research project, when an instructor is asking a student to go engage with library resources or even use things, interview people, it can't do that.
Right.
And it will invent things that don't exist, that looks like citations. They're punctuated. They have all the APA, sure, but they don't exist.
Right.
And that ranges from making up author names to making up something as simple as a page citation, or just totally inappropriate. You don't need to cite Washington, D.C. as the capital of the United States. That being said, I do want to say that we're like saying, what are the pros and cons now?
Yeah.
Everything is changing really quickly.
Yeah.
And, I think 2 days ago, ChatGPT 4 came out. So what we say now could be slightly different tomorrow.
Right.
And we're focusing a lot on text. There's also AI that generates images. The most well-known one of the most well-known ones is made by the same people who made ChatGPT, DALL-E 2. And that has some pros and cons also.
And didn't that one win an award and cause some uproar from other artists who felt, this wasn't a human creating this work, so there was no sympathy or empathy or, the things that a human would imbue a work with. And they said, well, maybe it should not be winning an award because it doesn't have these human characteristics. I recall reading about that and thinking, this is an interesting direction we're going in.
The issue of emotions is a really interesting one, Brian. I had a conversation this week with an instructor who his response to ChatGPT in assessment was one of his questions that he wanted to ask students when they did readings, not just summarizing knowledge or in place of summarizing knowledge, was to ask students how they felt about a reading and how it made them feel about the issue or the topic. This was a geography class and dealing with climate change. And so because it's not human and AI is generative, it can't really talk about personal experience and emotion as humans do. So that was, I thought that was a really interesting and a good example of how highly personalized things are, and bringing this kind of ethical and emotional response to intellectual problems is something that is uniquely human and important when we're choosing significant problems or even evaluating things like relevance, which is a key critical thinking skill.
Yeah, one example.
So, go ahead, Emily.
I was just gonna say, this was a really interesting thing to go back to citations and emotion was, I was playing around with ChatGPT and asked it to do citations, and it always referred to them as he, So then I wrote back and was like, actually, like all of those authors, because I gave it some authors, I said use she pronouns. And then a little while later, like a few days later, I asked it to write something in my voice to see what it would say. And it was all she, very like feminine. And I was like, it's interesting that it's trying to learn about me and replicate things that are important to me, but it doesn't have that context. So it loses some of that. Like you have to give it the context, but people are always changing context. So it's hard to know what they'll feel or think or do in any moment.
It's interesting because we've been training computers for a long time to recognize things. You know, when you go onto a website and you have to pick an image, pick the street lights or click the squares that have the crosswalk in them to prove that you're human. You're not proving you're human. You're helping the computer learn what a crosswalk looks like or what a stoplight looks like so that it can expand its memory. And then later on, when somebody says, tell me what a stoplight looks like, the computer can go, it's a round thing with 3 colors and blah, blah, blah. So we've been training these computers for a long time to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that is such a good, both of these things, I would say that that's a big thing that is a pro, but also goes back to that Emily Jo's point about it's a really broad conversation in how generative AI is going to affect education. Understanding how the technology works, understanding what is going on when both from the CAPTCHA proving you're human, but also the training of a system to identify what the many different ways that a stoplight can look in an image. Both of those things are going on. And the way that ChatGPT, understanding how it works is important if it's going to be used as a tool, just as learning how to drive a car or use a Photoshop program are important. Literacy skills, and there's now a whole new area of computer multimedia literacy, information literacy. So it's not new in some ways, but it's broad application and access, and the many ways that we're going to encounter is much broader. Yeah.
So if we look ahead, and you know, right now we're kind of dealing with the present and the immediate future, and kind of, you know, responding to this you know, outbreak, if you will, of of AI. But looking ahead, like long term, how can we be more proactive? And obviously, like, we can't predict the future, or if you can, you know, let me know and we'll go buy some lottery tickets together. But
Cool, I'm on.
yeah. But you know, what can we do to be more proactive? You know, thinking about, okay, what can this do, and what can this tool do, and what might it do in the future for us? And you know, how can we respond? How can we better respond and be ready for it as it evolves?
I think one of the big things is just to keep educating ourselves and playing around with it. I mean, I think a lot of it is just, you know, testing it, figuring out where has it grown, and as well as having conversations like this with a bunch of people who have used it in a bunch of different ways, and to use it with students and see their ideas, because they have different backgrounds with potentially using AI and technology, as well as, you know, librarians who have extensive knowledge about data literacy. So I think it's really about kind of reaching across silos and playing around and experimenting and making space for that uncertainty in our teaching and learning and our own understanding of our expertise, and know that, you know, this isn't going away and it will continue to develop, and it'll continue to get quote unquote smarter if we want to think about it that way. But that also means that there's so many possibilities for us to explore. And I think it's really about getting the opportunity and chance to do that.
Yeah.
I love what you said about bringing students into the conversation. I think like that is huge because we, for a long time, as educators, we've always thought we know what's best for students. We know what's best for students, but do we really? Like, maybe to a certain extent, but students are smart and they want to have control of their learning, and they know what they want, and they're more aware of how they learn now and what's effective for them. And so I think that's a great kind of point that you made, is to start bringing the students into the conversation now. And that can help us that can help guide our thinking as well, moving forward with this.
Putting my student hat on for a second, our Writing 101 and 102 courses that Shelley Rodrigo worked on, they're absolutely beautiful courses. And she has the students mind map. So you start out with an idea, and then you draw some extra bubbles, and you put in your topics, and you mind map this whole thing. And then later on, you get to view a paper that was written by a student in a previous offering of the class. And I think as a student, one thing that we get caught up in is, how do I know I'm doing the right thing? What should my final product look like? And if we could, in week 3, have the instructor say, write an essay about a topic you know something about, then have week 4 locked down. And then they write their essay, they submit it. And then in week 4, they say, go to ChatGPT and have it write an essay about something you know about. And then we're going to compare the two and see, which one do you like better and why? Give me some reasons why yours is better than ChatGPT. Give me some reasons why the ChatGPT one is better than what you wrote. But we can really only do that if we know that, like what Gretchen was saying earlier, that what ChatGPT, the information it's feeding us, is correct and accurate and peer-reviewed, maybe. So there are those kind of hangups. But it's always nice as a student going, all right, what does my final product need to look like so that I know I'm learning the right things? Especially for me, like, give me an example of what it needs to look like. Show me what this cake needs to look like after I'm done baking it, so I'm not left with this giant glob of,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love so many things about that. Those are wonderful, explicit examples of things that we can do right now in order to have a conversation and invite our students in. I want to just a couple of cautious things again about data literacy and good citizenship in the digital world. ChatGPT, the OpenAI, the company, is using, just as you described with CAPTCHA, it might be, they're using human behavior and feedback, and they're gathering personal information. So that's something you want to let your students know before, and let them opt out if they don't want to be part of that. As Emily Jo's story said, ChatGPT is remembering, oh, this is the way Emily Jo is thinking, and it's applying that. OpenAI itself requires, in their sort of terms, students have to be, or users have to be 18 years or older. So these are some important also things to know about terms and privacy about that tool. You also described process. One of the challenges to learning about learning and learning how to learn is that students are often very focused on what is the right answer. In my ideal world, the future of education in ChatGPT and other generative AI is maybe we have a chance to shift more to process than we do, and ways of thinking, than in getting the right answer. Because in that story you told, for example, drawing a mind map is something that at the moment still DALL-E 2 can't do. Generative AI can't do accurately. And it focuses on how I write the paper, how I judge if it's good or better, how I make improvements, why I write, why I made the choices. And ultimately, people will contribute to the world and be happy and be able to meet the challenges in their life, from love letters to the editor, to presentations for a new job, not because they got good job on an essay in English 101 in 2002 or 3, but because they went, wow, well, first I think about who's my audience. And then I think about where might I find information about this and what are other ways this has been done. And then I forget all about that. And I just dump my personal heart and soul, not worrying about punctuation. And then I ask ChatGPT and I put all those mixed up feelings or whatever generative AI, I put all those in there and I see what it says, and then I revise. And that's how I write.
I love that point too about process and thinking about audience, because some of the most impactful ways of using AI, you have to put in those things. And so students have to be able to recognize what we call the rhetorical situation with the purpose and audience to plug into the tools. So I think even telling students, by first knowing that, it also helps you use AI better, and also is the skills you want to be developing in all these situations where you're producing some sort of text or image. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's
such a good point. Such a good point. You have to know a lot. And the first thing that a generative AI gives you, generally not the best, that you can make the tool do for you. You need to drive it. And to do that, you need to know a lot about the situation.
Well, and that, we've talked about scaffolding a lot throughout the podcast. It tends to be, I think if our listeners had a nickel for every time we brought up scaffolding, we'd have a lot of rich listeners. But when you bring up process, that's what it makes me think of. When we work with instructors, and I'm sure you all, when you work with instructors as well, that we can scaffold a project and talk about process, and we can break it up into chunks. We can look at how we get from point A to point B, instead of just let's get to point B, and get to that final product, but really dive into the how. And I think that is a more valuable experience for students moving forward, right? And how they can grow and jump into their own professional careers and whatnot. And ultimately that's what we should be looking at, is how are we preparing students for this world outside of education, right? I was an English major. I wrote a lot of essays. I haven't written a single essay since I've graduated, right? I write in other ways, and I have to use those skills, but the process of writing is what I would take away from that, more so than just, hey, did I get the themes of Hamlet correct?
It's also an opportunity for us to learn more about how people learn. Mm-hmm. One of the most effective ways for any human to understand new information is to draw it, to represent it visually. And I don't mean, that it's a masterpiece that could be recognized and put on the wall. It might be a mind map, but it can be other ways. There's a tremendous amount of research that if you want students to remember something, if you want them to connect it to existing knowledge, ask them to draw the information. Or for a student to study, to say, okay, let me draw what I've learned about the cell, or let me draw the history of the French Revolution. These are extremely effective and underused in many of our disciplines ways for
Yeah.
students to learn.
Well, and I think just giving the students the option too, right? Like, you know, if you want to show me that you have mastered this knowledge of whatever concept in this course, like, can you show me via a written work? Can you show me via a visual medium? You know, what are those ways, and how can we, we accept that and be more kind of open to that, for students? Because you're right, like, students are going to learn in different ways, and how they learn and how they express that knowledge is going to be vastly different from student to student. And, I think we can use this tool maybe in this idea of AI to kind of help foster that a little bit.
Yeah. I just learned more about what's called the Meaningful Writing Project, where instructors at 3 different institutions, they have over 1,000 students now respond to what the most meaningful project is that they did. And they identified 3 characteristics. They called it the AAA. So there's asset-based, so something students feel like they can do and accomplish, and that they're not going in at a deficit. Agency, so having that choice between drawing or representing, and then the last one was applicability. So does this apply to my future job? And I love the idea that all of these things are contextualized in a negotiation with the student, because we don't know what assets they're bringing in, or
Yeah.
what agency would look like to them, or how they are applying it, until we ask those process questions or give them the opportunity to do things in different ways, because we don't know what they're interested in. One of the conversations we had about ChatGPT was with folks at the think tank, and I just loved the addition of this question that tutors could ask folks coming in, which is, what tools did you use to write this? And I just love that, because it opens up all of the things that students do to write and learn, and the idea that we use tools all the time, whether it's spell check or even tools to draw, like a pen, paper, and it allows for that to be normalized, and I think appreciated, and also allows us to understand what tools students really are engaging with. Because if I ask them to draw something and someone uses a pen or a paper, someone uses Dolly 2, and some uses like a graphic Excel program, those also all allow agency and assets depending on students' abilities and where they're at, but it also still gets to the same learning outcomes. So I think that this is an exciting time to make those connections with students.
Interestingly, those AAA, those 3 points, are also characteristics of a culture of integrity, academic integrity, those qualities. And as I said, academic integrity is one of the questions that comes up often from folks related to generative AI. It's a little bit different with writing than it is with Dolly 2, but going to Brian's point about concerns with images that are generated based on other people's images. There's a appropriation, and all of that is a little bit different in the visual world. But agency, respecting what students bring, whether that's a tool or, well, I grew up in a household that speaks French, therefore I'm very familiar with this literature or this history. There are many different types of assets that students bring. And if students feel that they can share that and they're encouraged to explain their process, and it seems meaningful and applicable, the work that they're doing, and they can participate in choosing, therefore to making it applicable and meaningful, there's less motivation or need to find ways that are or do things, behaviors that are not appropriate. And then there's conversation around it so that instructors and students can better understand what is and is not appropriate.
You know, I taught the UNIV 101 course this past fall, and for those of you
Speaking
outside of
exciting.
yeah, it was fun. For those of you outside of U of A, that's our intro to our gen ed program course that incoming students take. And one of the activities I did was I kind of had them basically make a little mini travel brochure for their hometown, something where they could, you know, share about themselves and where they're from, and we could get to know each other a little bit better and whatnot. And I completely underestimated how much students would want to share. And here I was thinking, oh, they're going to do this. It'll, you know, take like 5 minutes to kind of fill out the template I gave to them. They'll take like a minute to share it out to the class. We'll get through everybody. I barely got through half of my students. No, it wasn't that they wrote a lot, and the template is that when they started talking, some of them would go on for like 5, 6, 7 minutes. They were so, even if they like came across as like, oh, my town is so boring, and then they went on and on about all these things that they could do in their hometown, and I was like, well, that doesn't sound really boring to me. But it was just, like I said, I completely underestimated like how much they would want to talk about themselves and where they came from. And I think that speaks to your point, Emily Jo, is that, you know, if you give them the opportunities to, you know, to bring in their personal life and their personal aspects to the course, they're going to take that and they're going to run with it, and they're going to feel more empowered.
Yeah, I think this idea of empowerment is huge. One thing, to go back to something that Gretchen mentioned about AI ethics, is I have this one lingering concern, just one, which is but is that eventually something like ChatGPT is going to face a paywall, and that's gonna you know, limit things like accessibility and who gets to use it to brainstorm or feel like, or even feel like if there is a free version, they're willing to participate in that because it might interpret that differently. So I'm curious too, as AI continues, the ways that that's going to impact students as well. So I think one of the conversations we keep thinking about is like long-term impacts. And so I think that's one to just keep our eyes on is what this will look like from a financial standpoint.
Such a good example. I was just talking with some engineering students and noticing that, you know, most of the students didn't have a 3D printer at home. One group was really advanced. They were like almost done with the project, really cool. They were already working on the final stage. And that's because one of the students had a 3D printer at home and they were the only ones. But just like any tool, access is an advantage.
I was thinking about this too with different disciplines and what we can do now with AI. And I'm thinking about music and sampling from songs and how students with certain programs have advantages that way, but how that's in some ways something we couldn't have done as easily without AI tools that we have now. So it's also interesting in these creative disciplines, like the example of the photograph, what this is going to look like, but also how it's been being used. We just might have called it something different. So I think now we're also thinking back like, well, what has been AI and what hasn't? Because potentially GarageBand has AI elements to it. So it's kind of interesting we're at a good moment to step back too, as well as look forward.
That's a really good first question. If instructors want small things to begin, is just ask students, have you used what is it? Have you used this? Do you use, and there are a range of them, Jasper, a bunch of different tools, but ChatGPT is definitely the one most people are familiar with overtly.
So during our podcast here, I've been asking ChatGPT some of the questions that we have been
Oh,
discussing.
awesome.
And, well, okay, so it's awesome. It gives
Silent
me replies.
member of the group.
The replies, however, are how can I say this nicely? They're very, very basic. They have not gone into the depth and explored the way, we go off on a tangent and then we come back and expound a little bit more. So I think that's, as we were talking about, one of the limitations of this thing. Depending on the question you ask it, what you're hoping to get back, it kind of, in a way, it tells you what you want to hear, not necessarily the truth, or some groundbreaking revelation that you might be hoping for. And also just reading some of these, as we had talked earlier, like the empathy and the human side of it, it just tells you things that are impossible. The coordination of only one person can do one thing, and it's just, so I'm very amused by what ChatGPT. So I've had a good laugh with it, and now I can go, okay, well, yeah, I need to hunker down and write my own paper, because whatever it's going to tell me, if I were to turn this into an instructor, the instructor is probably going to think I am completely sleep deprived, have no idea what I'm talking about. So it was fun, but back to reality, I think.
Yeah.
See, and I think that right there is like a great way to approach it in a class with students, right? And to show them and talk that through with the students, and to do these type of activities. Like, don't be afraid of the tool, but embrace it and show, like, let's use it for what it's good at, and recognize the things for what it's bad at, and be able to kind of move forward with it as something that can be a positive, while also acknowledging the detriments of it.
Yeah.
The professor at Wharton had a nice example, and I think we included this in the writing statement, of small tweaks, but small changes we can make to our teaching. Ask your students how do you want them to include, if they use ChatGPT, or describe their process.
Yeah.
That might come in a cover sheet. It might be an acknowledgement. Maybe it's a little note when they upload it to a Dropbox in D2L. Just, what did you do? And this instructor had something specific when it came to ChatGPT, was, what did you do to verify the information?
Yeah, that's great. I think, kind of touching on that, I'm a huge proponent of reflection in classes. So even just, a reflection at the end of any sort of project, like you were saying, like, how did you do this? What was your process? What what would you have done differently if you, had to do it again? Like, what things were difficult for you? What things came easy? What tools were helpful? Like, all of those things. And I think it helps the students kind of recognize their own behaviors, maybe, and like we mentioned before, helps prepare them for their own future. I think reflection is a powerful tool in that sense.
Yeah, metacognitive processes, huge amount of research. They help us remember, and they make us aware of how we think.
Yeah, I also love to return way back to the idea of scaffolding using ChatGPT.
Get that construction hat on.
Well, give students the space to play around with it, and to scaffold before doing something more high stakes with it. I think it's important. But our WAC newsletter had ChatGPT define what our UCAT is, our University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology, and it did not do it in 60 words like I told it to. But it's also really interesting You could replace UCAT with any teaching and learning center or any library. Like, and it's so generic. So it's
Yeah.
interesting too, how my own like learning about it would be more refined too, as I've like scaffolded my ideas about GPT before maybe publishing something with it. So it's funny too, like, yeah, it's very synergistic how we all learn about each other, Chat GPT and us. But I love
Yeah,
Ryan that
it's a
you-
That
novel.
sounds like a new Netflix show. I think you should pitch it to him.
Yeah.
ChatGPT and Us,
There
written
you
by
go.
Emily Jo Schawller.
Yeah,
Right.
I love it. Uh,
Excellent. Well, I think this was a very insightful conversation. I enjoyed it. I hope we can continue to have these conversations, whether they're through the podcast or just, through our own office or across the university. I would love to, see these type of conversations continue across campus as well, and invite more people into them, because I think it's really great, and we learn from one another, and so I've enjoyed it. I want to thank you both for coming on with us today, and thank you both for the work that you're doing across the university and with the writing programs and with faculty and whatnot as well, in regards to keeping up with everything that's happening in the world of AI.
yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you
And
for
just
your
a-
encouraging
just a-
conversation.
Oh,
And just a quick disclaimer that none of our questions here were generated by ChatGPT.
true. It's true. We wrote them ourselves. I mean, this might be the last podcast where we write the questions ourselves, but who knows? So, well, thanks again. And for those listening, keep listening, keep subscribing. We appreciate it. And we'll see you next month.
Come
Thank
hang
you.
out with humans.
Yes.
The Futures of Digital Learning podcast is a production of the University of Arizona University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas you'd like to share with our office, go to the Contact Us link on our website, ucatt.arizona.edu.